So good morning. I'm Scott Kay with BASF. I manage our U.S. business. But today I'm really excited just to talk about soybeans, which looks like to me the future is pretty bright for soybeans. Who here heard about breaking 200 bushels this year, a new record this week? So I think it's everybody here did that perfect. I think it's pretty exciting that that record was broken. I think it really leads into the discussion we want to have here about what's it going to take to average 100 bushels of soybeans, and what do we need to do differently? And I think we have some really bright people here, because farmers, have the biggest job on earth, and they're charged with making sure that we have enough feed and fuel, which will be used both by soybeans. And how do we provide for those soybeans that's going to really take off? And what are some of those challenges? So I think for us, I want to have a conversation about what challenges do they see in getting there, and what things are they doing that the practices they've adopted that they know are going to work for other farmers to start to use in their operation as well. But before we go too far into it, let me introduce the panelists that we have here to talk. First, we have in the middle, we have Ryan Myers. To my left here, Nick Fassler. And to my on to the very end there, Marc Hoobler. So they've joined us here for this discussion. I'm going to ask them a few questions. I just have a few, but I think you'll notice once we get going, these guys have a lot of good answers. And so before we get started, why don't I just let you both, or all three of you guys, introduce yourselves. Nick? Yep.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. My name is Nick Fassler with BASF. I'm the Director of Tech Service, so I lead our Tech Service team for the U.S. and a native of Illinois originally.
Hello, I'm Ryan Myers. I am the farmer on the panel. So I reside in Fairbury, Illinois, where I farm on a family farm with my father. And then I also have a job as an integrated solutions consultant for a John Deere dealership in Pontiac, Illinois. So thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Yeah, and my name is Marc Hoobler. I'm the agronomy lead for soybeans at canola for BASF. So cover from Delaware to the Dakotas. So glad to be here.
Thank you, guys. And just to frame a little bit why more bushels are going to be needed. Today, we have between food and fuel, we have an estimate that by 2050 we'll need 60% more soybeans. If you look at that, we have a 30%, extreme weather. Anybody seen any extreme weather here lately? Caused up to a 30% reduction. So you're fighting on two extremes. One, plans to grow more. At the same time, Mother Nature has other plans for you annually. The other thing we talk about here is that one of the critical things that's impacting yield is weed control. And today, farmers are spending upwards of $26 billion annually on weed control. And if you take a look at that weed control, what's the cost of that? It's increased almost double. You're talking about $50 plus in some cases now to control weeds in soybeans, and that's double versus about 10 years ago. So the challenges are there, the opportunity is there. So let's talk to our panelists about what are they planning for. So maybe just share with us, when you think about breaking 100 bushels as your average, and we'll start with Ryan, what's the first thing that comes to mind that you got to solve for?
Well, I think one of the first things that we need to solve is variety selection. I think that varieties are going to have to improve, and then we're going to have to place those varieties on the correct acre of that farm to achieve that 100 bushels to the acre.
So how do you think you go about getting to the right varieties?
Well, I think, us personally, we rely a lot on our seed agronomists, our representatives, right?
Okay.
I think that, having recommendations given to us for what hybrids are going to perform best on which soil types, right? If you have a soil with wetter ground, you need to have this variety A, and if you have one with a little drier ground, this variety is going to perform better.
Makes sense. Maybe tell us, what's your current soybean yield? What's your starting point to 100?
So I think as an average, I'm very happy to achieve 70 bushels an acre, okay, on our farm. I think that's a very strong average right now. Some years I hope it's a little better than that, but that's a good average to start with.
Very good. And what varieties do you plant? What numbers do you go with?
Okay, so we start with the Zetavo 2501s, and then we're going up to the Zetavo 3752s.
And so as you think about planting those, what are you looking at, any new ways to raise that selection process? Because I think like Marc might want to talk about a placement tool, or is there other, what do you think you're fighting through on placement?
Well, as far as placement goes, population is always the biggest thing that I wonder about. Am I planting the right populations? Currently what we're doing is we're planting 140,000 roughly, 140,000 across the board. And I always feel like that could be changed, but I'm not sure exactly how to do it or which way I need to go.
Marc, what do you think?
Yeah, I think Ryan said it. Really, it all starts with the seed and the genetics. That's kind of the key component of maximizing yield is the variety itself. And then what we do at BASF is when we think about how to maximize that variety's yield, there's really two other components of that. There's environment, and there's also management. And so when most people think about environment, they think about the weather, but there's a lot more to environment than just the weather. We like to get down to the field level environment, understand where water is flowing to and from, understand the different soil types, organic matter, pHs, all of that factors into how a variety likes to build yield. And then how do we manage, to mitigate those environmental risk factors? And so there's a lot of things that we do. We recommend early planting. I think, you talk about trying to get to 100 every day past April 15th, you lose about a half a bushel a day. So we really like to get seed in the ground early, really not focus so much about soil temperature, but soil condition. When it's ready, go ahead and plant beans before corn. I think that's a mindset shift that we're trying to get established to really push soybean yields. I think we're leaving a lot of yield on the table by not really paying as much attention to soybeans as we should with some of these things.
Nick, what do you how do you see that?
Well, being the chemistry guy, so it's all about starting clean too. So how do we set the foundation, from a weed management standpoint? Totally agree with what Marc and Ryan had to add of placing the right variety on the right acre. But, are you in a no-till system, conventional till, kind of how are you setting up those field conditions on that acre to really maximize it? And what's the program you're building around that?
Yeah, excellent. So Ryan and I were talking a little bit, emergence and planting in cold weather. So how do you think you'll overcome emergence or having more even stands?
Well, I think one of the main things for it even to stand is an even planting depth. Okay, so I am a firm believer of trying to get the seed at an even planting depth, not just going out there with maybe the old style equipment that we used to have where it would, you'd have that large variance. But then the other thing too is if we're going to go out and we're going to plant these soybeans early, how do we get the field fit, okay, to limit some of that risk, right? So vertical till, we've used a vertical till on some of our early planted soybeans, makes the ground a little blacker, right? So that it maybe handle the frost a little better. But that's going to help with that emergence because that field's going to be a little more evened out, in our opinion.
What about pests at emergence, or are you worried about any disease at emergence?
We're always worried about disease, right? I mean, do we need to be changing how we treat our beans, right? Do I need to be taking it from like a basic treatment package up to a gold package, if you will, right? Throwing everything at those soybeans if I'm going to be planting them early to give them that best chance. That's something that I've wondered about. We've done a trial this year where we have some Olivo on some early planted soybeans. They look great. They did emerge great. We'll have to kind of take it to yield at the end.
See how they perform from there. So maybe Nick or Marc, when you think about the seed treatment, how much impact do you think that would have on yield And what have you seen people start to practice when it comes to that?
Yeah, and I think it's a good question, Scott. I think, I mentioned planting earlier just a little while ago. Seed treatments are a critical component of early planting, right? Anything you can do to get that crop out of the ground as fast as it can, and it may sit there a little longer, in those early plantings. So we want to protect that seed. There's a few complexes really. Once the crop is up, there is no corrective action for, like sudden death syndrome, for example, or SCN. Those two specifically, we're starting to see, really show up this time of year, especially with SDS. And so there is no foliar, remedy. So a seed treatment like a Levo can provide you some protection, along with selecting the right variety. I think, that's probably, we're going to sound like a broken record here, but variety selection, depending on what you're concerned about, that's how you really mitigate as much risk as you can, because a lot of these varieties will give you that native tolerance and some protection just with the genetic package it has. Layer in seed treatments, and you've got a really nice, solid, defensive type of bean that can still go after yield.
Just to add, Scott, I think that's where like data and history really come into play, because, are you soil sampling for SCN? Are you evaluating for sudden death? Have you seen that in the past? And really start to integrate those tools on those farms where you're confident you'll have a response, but also testing with it elsewhere to understand the impacts of those technologies.
Yeah, I think for a pest, SCN, it's robbing farmers of roughly $1.5 billion annually. $1.5 billion. And so, but I still run across a lot of farmers who aren't testing their farm or aren't doing it annually. So where does testing belong, and when should people do it?
Yeah, so I think awareness is critical. After harvest, I think is a great time to understand, what you have, and look at your egg counts and determine, is this field going to be a problem, and do I need to employ different management practices, when I go to soybeans again on that field. Today we've got some tools for SCN, like Levo, for example. The native traits like PI88788 and Peking. In the future, we're going to have BASF is going to launch the first ever GMO trait for SCN towards the end of the decade. That's really going to be a game changer, because we're going to incorporate it obviously into the seed, into the genetics. It's going to be kind of a three-legged stool, so to speak, with genetics, with the native traits, and with the GMO trait. And I really think from we talk about, again, pursuing that 100 bushel. On average, growers are losing 5 bushels an acre to SCN today with the tools that we have. So once we layer in that new technology with the GMO trait, that's potentially going to be another 10% yield bump.
What do you think, Ryan? What do you think about? Is that something you would want to explore if you haven't been doing that?
Oh, for sure. I think that's going to be extremely exciting in the future. It gives us producers something to look forward to, right? And I don't think there's going to be one magic bullet that's going to get us to the 100 bushels the acre. It's going to be all these things, right? It's going to be work from everyone on both accounts to get to the 100 bushel, but this is super exciting to hear about.
That's good. I think I was at a field day in Iowa, and the conversations around corn. Now, I know I just declared soybeans are going to be king, but corn still gets everybody's attention. And what they were talking about up front is that corn rootworm was still feeding on the new trait, even though the new trait was supposed to be, protecting the crop. And so I think it's going to have to be an integrated system. It's going to have to be both the seed treatment and the native trait that's coming. And so when did you say we're going to launch that?
Towards the end of the decade. Yeah. And what's exciting, I guess, for me at BASF is globally, soybeans are a strategic crop. And why that's important to the grower is because of the investments we're making in breeding, in trait development, in our crop protection, business. We're looking at soybeans holistically and really trying to bring those solutions to growers.
So back to Ryan. What other steps do you think you got to take?
Well, I think the next thing that I would want to discuss, since we've covered the varieties and the disease, is let's talk about weed management. I think weeds do hinder yield. We all know that, right? And I think that we're going to need some different modes of action or different ways of controlling these weeds throughout the growing season more effectively and more cost effectively as well.
So talk about your farm a little bit. What weeds are you trying to manage? How do you do it today? Maybe just share a little bit about what your current approach is.
Yeah, so our current approach is we want to go to the field and we want to plant into a clean field, right? So we've started using a fall burn down in the fall. Then we're coming back with our pre, laying down a residual with our pre, and then kind of playing it by ear after that as far as how much pressure. But the main weed that we're trying to control is the almighty water ham.
What we can see driving in, if you came in from Springfield, you can see it nearly every field on the left or right. Yeah, exactly. And so what practices do you put in? You use a residual in the spring? What's your plan to control it?
Well, I think our plan to control it is try to mix up the modes of action the best we can with the residuals, right? I think that we need to be putting multiple residuals down throughout the growing season. So as far as a pre and a post, and then maybe in the future relying on a little more of the technology that's coming out to kind of combat those weeds in a more economical way.
How would you do that? It feels like we're leading the witness here a little bit, but no, I think Ryan had a really different experience, probably one that not many growers had across the country, using technology both from a herbicide and from a application. So maybe just talk about your experience. What you tried.
Okay, so this last summer we got to use a sprayer that's a smart sprayer that can go out and it can see the weed and spray the weed. Okay, so as you're driving through the field, if there's a weed, it'll only spray that weed. And the really neat thing about it is that you're able to take and also spray your residual at the same time. So the cost savings of going out to a field and only applying 10% of the field with a contact herbicide, along with laying down a residual for protection further on, is amazing technology. And that technology is coming quickly, and it's going to be a game changer for a lot of people.
Awesome. So how did it work for your fields? How do they look? Good?
Yeah, it worked really well. I will say that. Nothing's perfect right now as the technology is still being worked on. The capabilities of it are there. The foundation is set, but I feel like there is some more improvements to make along the way, especially in narrow road beans, right? So 30-inch beans, I think there was a lot more success, but with 15-inch rows, we had the canopy, and if it can't see the weed, it can't spray the weed. So that's kind of what we fell into on that.
Yeah, I think maybe Nick, you could share. We feel similar that the new technology still takes a very agronomic approach, and so maybe Nick, you can talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, and BASF's in a unique position where we're getting to work with the technology as it's developed, but also step back and look at our herbicide portfolio and how do we build tools that, what tools do we have today, but what future tools do we need to support these types of systems? And then what's the programs we need to build for growers around those tools? I think from a standpoint of integrating it, initially it's more complexity. I think we all have to admit it's 2 tanks, 2 booms. There's a lot you can do with it. It's kind of how do you want your whopper? I mean, you can make all sorts of combinations, but we need to start simple. So, starting strong with residuals, it kind of goes back to our Operation Weed Eradication program, is how do you eliminate weeds from emerging to begin with? And then those fewer weeds that emerge are the ones when you can really maximize this technology to go out and control those weeds post, but ensuring you're controlling the weeds at the right height as well. So for me, when I step back and look at it, how do you leverage it to time your herbicide when it's going to be most effective? And then you can maximize that value. You're controlling your weeds. And at the end of the day, I think every farmer just wants a weed-free field. So how do we get to that end goal that's on everybody's, check the box, and now let's move on to late season management. But that's where BASF's really investing into new herbicides. I know Liam's here to talk about Liberty Ultra and how we're concentrating that product, but then also what residuals do we need in the future to apply posts that maybe have a bit of knockdown with them just to help kind of broaden out the control when you run that sprayer across the field.
Anything else, Ryan, on that you're thinking about for next year, how you might improve the application?
Well, as I think more timeliness, right, is always key. Sometimes it's extremely hard for me to wait until, we're getting close to canopy, or we go out there and we scout these fields and we see that there's not many weeds there. So, let's hold off, right? And I think that what we need to do is we need to go out there and just be attacking these fields, before canopy, and making sure that we do the best we can. And as far as these smart sprayers, like I said, it's going to be a game changer for the future, and be thinking of the business model behind it, right? I think it's fantastic that you guys are working with these sprayers. I think that says a lot about the company in general, but I'm really looking forward to the future of the smart sprayers.
Yeah, I think one of the things we talked about our experiences is that lighting is so critical. A camera driving down the field can't see without light, even in broad daylight, because of the shadows and those sorts of things. And I think what Ryan's talking about is what it's going to allow us to do is not wait for weeds, which I think is one of the things that's reducing our ability to get to 100 bushels. Is if you wait for the weeds to spray them, you probably lost a few bushels in that time period, or you've lost moisture, or whatever is contributing to the issue. But then too, the technology's got to play with. You got to use the technology properly so that you get that early kill. So it's the sprayer turns on and off and can see it. And so that's the lighting on the One Smart sprayer. We're really proud of our sprayer, and that it's going to be have a lighting system that avoids that shade or the sun going down that's causing a shadow. And so I think it's that's going to be really important, is how we do that. The other thing is that talk about your mentality change on that post spray. And we talked about that a little bit too, about what rate will you use now for the spot spray. If you're going to be put residual, you've already done that with your fall and your early spring, and now you have the ability to go residual again. Talk about your mentality about that spot spray.
Well, I think if we can go out there and spray only the weeds, there's no reason not to throw, the entire program at it. I think that we need to be increasing the rates of the chemical that we use, because we're only spraying it in a certain spot. So we're already saving the money by applying 10, 15, 20% of the field only, okay, as we drive across the entire field. So I think we're going to be able to spend a little more money on a better tank mix to make sure that those weeds will be deceased in the end.
And I think that's really critical for that mindset to be there, in my opinion, because today, if those fields you drove by on the way in to the Farm Progress show, remember those seeds, that could be some 400,000 seeds per plant, and that the seed's going to last for 5 years in the soil. And so we can't afford to let it go to seed and harvest it and spread it out even further. And so I think there are those strategies, that mindset to say, when I do apply, I want to make sure we get the job done, not have it live on, or not just kind of get it. I think that is a good mentality. What else you see in your journey for 100 bushels?
Boy, I mean, as far as the diseases, the varieties, and this technology, what are we going to do maybe when we get to 100 bushels?
Oh, okay. This question's for you and Marc and Nick. So go ahead, Ryan, ask those.
Well, I mean, thinking out loud, I was thinking about this yesterday. So let's say that I've gotten to 100 bushels, okay? Let's say it's 3, 4, 5 years down the road. What am I going to have to change on the backside of this? Or am I going to have to control residue a little differently? Am I going to have to go to a smaller head on the combines to be able to harvest these efficiently? And then what are we going to do on the backside of these elevators and stuff, as far as how are we going to get these soybeans to market?
Go ahead.
Sounds like good problems, huh? Yeah. But no, I mean, I think even stepping back into late season management when we have that type of yields, I know we've worked with a lot of high yield growers, throughout the U.S., and desiccation comes into play. So what do you need to do with the canopy before you run the combine through? So that may be one solution to bring less plant matter in through the machine for threshing. But yeah, I mean, more trucks on the road, more trucks to the elevator. I think logistically, those will be the issues we face that we're just going to have to scale appropriately as things go forward. I think Scott talked too about replacing corn. So, are you kind of trading bushels in a sense? Does some of that corn capacity go to soybeans? But I think our end result is we're pushing yields on both crops. So probably not a fact there.
What's your current plan? How do you manage the soybeans? They're emerged. You've done your herbicide application. Now what? What's the next thing? How do you manage your beans after that?
Well, I think I am missing part of it though, because the way that I've always looked at soybeans is you care for them throughout the year, right? And then when we get to the fungicide, we always look at that as being the last trip across the field. Okay. And we brought them all the way to R3. Are we missing something after R3? Is there some micronutrients that we need to be spraying on these beans to get to 100 bushels? That's kind of one question I've got for you guys.
Well, first of all, I think in terms of, overall farmers, the fact that you're making that fungicide application at R3 already, I think, propels you along to that 100 bushels. Because today, I think we would still say not every farmer has adopted that practice, even though we know that disease and or plant health aspects are a primary contributor to the to yield. But what kind of things were you thinking about you might use after R3? What are you considering?
Well, I think what we need to probably start doing to get to the 100 bushels a acre is we probably need to start tissue sampling soybeans. Okay, and having a lab tell us what nutrients that we're missing, what's manganese, sulfur, so on, right? And then finding a product from our retailers to go out and apply to those fields in a timely fashion to get them to that extra step.
Yeah, I think sounds like a good idea. So you could tissue sample. Anything else you're thinking about, Nick, that we could do?
Yeah, I mean, from a fertility standpoint, sometimes those unseen factors are the hard ones to determine. So I think tissue sampling, trying just to assess the overall plant health late season. I think from the standpoint of what we can see, we can manage pretty well. Be that aphids, are they coming in? Do we have late stink bugs? Do you have, foliar diseases? But, from a disease management standpoint, certainly BASF's been a leader in fungicides. I started my career here 20 years ago with headlines, so we have a lot of passion around that. But how do we time those products to really get there prior to disease onset, but also maximize the growth efficiency and plant health value that product can bring? And that's where we've done a lot with Revitech here locally and just demonstrating the performance of that product. But yeah, I mean, I think the unknown is, biologicals. Where do they come into play? What's the nibblers that are maybe taken off the top 5 bushels that we can easily find a product or a solution to bring to that acre? I think there's a lot to do. I know, Marc, is your team kind of looking at that stuff as well?
Yeah, we are. And I think, I think about last week specifically and how much heat stress we had on the crop just last week. And, the farmers that proactively put on a fungicide, I think came through that, a little bit better. So you mentioned, a passion for plant health and fungicide. We certainly see that, in what we do. I think the general mindset with soybeans is, they're durable, they can handle it, and maybe, to your point, Ryan, just not quite as much attention to really push them for higher yields. And so, as we strive towards 100 bushel, we're obviously going to have to do more than we've been doing, right? And so all of these things that we've talked about come into play. And so it's exciting to think about the new technologies that we'll have. We haven't mentioned this yet, but I think there's going to be opportunities in the future for, and maybe even today, I don't know if you're doing this, Ryan, but burial rate scripts for population. So we know certain areas of field, could be managed at the variety level with population. We need higher populations, maybe as we go up the slope, lower populations as we go down. So can we get the planter technology and those scripts made to maximize just that one component of management in population to drive yield farther. In the future, I would love to see the technology where we're planting multiple varieties in the same field, depending on, where we would like to see a variety placed. So that's the prescriptive level that I think BASF is going to get to with some of the technology and testing that we're doing.
No, it's I see Ryan nodding like, okay, that's another opportunity. One other one I was thinking about is that what about biologicals in soybeans? So at maybe even at the from a seed treatment standpoint, I know rhizobia is probably taken for granted. I think in that we think it's just naturally occurring, but our research would show that it gets a little lazy if it's only naturally occurring. But there's a couple bushels there. Is that something you've explored on farm, or maybe what's your guys' experience with using a biological on soybeans?
Biologicals are something that I'm very interested in trying. We have not done any real field trials or anything with biologicals. It's something that I would explore in the future for sure. I think the seed treatment side of the biologicals is going to be the easiestly adapted for all the producers, but I also am wondering about the in-furrow type biologicals that may be able to be added to these planters fairly easily. Okay. When I think of biologicals, I think of how they're going to be on the seed. Is it going to cause trouble in the planter, right? When I look at biologicals also as far as foliar applied, I think being able to be mixed in these tank mixes with our current products is super important as well. So the ease of use is super, is highly, interests me. I think it would be great to use them. I look forward to using them in the future.
Nick or Marc, thoughts on biologicals?
Yeah, no, I mean, biologicals are a big component of our R&D work at BASF, especially from a seed treatment standpoint. It's an exciting area. I think, the biggest thing with biologicals is just trying to understand them and their mechanism and what they actually do. And so there's a lot of noise, so to speak, in the market today with respect to the biologicals. And so, I think the testing, the research that goes behind it, clear definitions of, what we're actually gaining by adding it. We don't want to add it just to have it there. It's got to actually be providing value. So I think all of that comes into play.
Yeah, and I think it even comes back to what Marc had said earlier with like variety placement. It's that critical. So where's it going to perform on that soil type, on that farm, and biologicals are that fine tuned is where you really get the value and benefit from them. But BASF is one of the largest suppliers of biologicals in the U.S. So we certainly have some strong products in our portfolio and certainly see opportunities. And I think what Ryan said is very critical is how do you enable a grower to utilize that technology without a lot of added complexity? Because anytime you slow down a planter, that was some of my most difficult phone calls is when a planter stopped because something's plugged up or something's going on. So you race right there and help them out. But that's that's one of those things we always take into consideration when we're developing a new product, new formulation, is how does it perform when it gets out in the real world, which is very important.
Yeah, I think BASF has quite a lineup in products from nitrogen fixing standpoint in soybeans. So biologicals that do that, and certainly with all the rage for biologicals in farming today, I think it's something people should definitely start taking a look at. Talk about your experience and how you're using biologicals in corn, Ryan. Maybe that's some insight there.
So in corn this year, we decided early on that we were going to do a pivot bio trial. Okay. And I kind of had to change things on our farm to what I would normally do. So we're strip tilling our corn, okay, with anhydrous ammonia in the fall as our main source of N. And when I decided to do pivot bio, I wanted a good way of doing a field trial across this 120-acre field. So what I did was I still stripped the field, I freshened the strips with a little bit of nitrogen, and then I went ahead and planted my pivot bio corn, okay? When I came back to side dress the nitrogen, 32% UAN, I wanted to replicate the field trials all the way across the farm so that I would have a good data set that I could look at later and see where that performed. And that's exactly what I want to do with these soybeans here in the future too, is I want to be able to replicate something across it. And that's why I was kind of leading towards more of a in-furrow or being able to change hybrids easily across the field, okay, to give me a good on-farm trial. Because the best data that I've ever seen is the data that comes from our farm, okay? Because we know the land and we know the ground, and we can vouch for it that way.
No, I think that's great, because I think having that corn mentality in soybeans is what's going to take to get to that 100 bushels. And so naturally exploring ways to drive yield or to do it differently with maybe less nitrogen. But I think there are definitely proven ways to put biologicals in soybeans. And maybe we just, as an industry, just haven't talked about it as much as we should. But we definitely have ways to do that. You talked about data. Now, I know that's what you do every day. But talk about how farmers should look at data, because I think it's one of those components. We can't just sit up here and say, hey, we've just spelled out a pathway. We've probably found 20 more bushels just in this 20 minutes, right? But how do you know? How do you follow your journey? And I think Ryan, you've got a good perspective on that.
Yeah. So for my full-time job, I'm an integrated solutions consultant, like I said, and one of my duties at the dealership is to manage people's data, as far as taking their data off of their planners and their applicators throughout the growing season and making sure that it's in a platform that they understand, okay? And then tying that back to their yield data so that they could do compare maps, right? So whether, like in corn, like a pivot bio trial, okay, for instance, is that, did it work? Can I compare it to my harvest map? It's their on-farm field trial that was very easily succeeded. But the one thing that I run into, and the biggest pain point of mine, is how many ag producers out there, how many farmers out there do not keep track of their data, okay? There's monitors out there that can do way more than these producers ever dreamed of, right? But they don't have the initiative to take, and they don't pull that data off and put it into any type of a platform for them to review it throughout the season. And I think when we get to this point here, and I think we're really close to this point, having past history of yield data and application maps and soybean history, right, varieties, and how they performed on the farm, right, I think that it's going to be extremely beneficial to the people that have kept track and taken those records and compiled that data for the use in the future, in the near future, to increase these yields.
I think that's good. Maybe I do think the data is going to be critical. We have several tools at BASF where data is important with Xarvio. And maybe talk about using, if we sat in a room then with the farmer and said, let's plan for next year, how do we use that data for decision-making, Marc, on the seed selection? And then, Nick, how would we use that data maybe from either one smart sprayer or making herbicide, fungicide decisions for the next year? Maybe talk about that a second.
Yeah. So, I think what's important is the decisions you make with the data that you have. So we're heavily reliant on data-driven decisions. I think it's going to be a key component to drive soybean yields farther, faster. We do a lot of testing on our varieties and understanding how that variety builds yield. I think that's a key component to what Ryan's talking about in variety selection and the data. So without the testing, you can't make the best decision for that particular field. So that's really what we're trying to get to as a prescription. We are going to be launching a new tool within Xarvio Field Manager called Seed Select. And so takes into account some of the things that we're doing from a testing standpoint, runs an algorithm in the background based on the farmer's field and the specifics of his field, and makes a variety recommendation. And so, in the past, we've had to do that a bit manually, so to speak. And so this should provide a bit more efficiency and to make some of those decisions faster and have confidence in that decision. Because ultimately, you don't want to make a mistake, right? So the more information you have, about your field, about the variety and how they match up, the better your outcomes are going to be.
So before you go, Nick, talk about your experience. So Ryan's been using Seed Select with his retailer, and so maybe talk about your experience with it. How's it changed?
Oh, I think it's a fantastic program, honestly. Like I said before, I heavily rely on a representative, or on my seed salesman to help me select those correct hybrids for those specific farms. And the old age of thinking in my mind is that, I want to plant a 2.8 here to start, and I want to plant a 3.6 here because I want to end close to home. Well, now we find ourselves, we do travel around a little bit more, maybe past the closest farm, right? Okay, so it might not be the efficient in that standpoint, but in the end, it's completely worth it because I've tried to stick to his plan of what he guides me, of what hybrids need to specifically be on that farm, and it has paid off. I am a firm believer of it. I think it's great knowledge, goes back into a lot of the technology that I like, right? So it's been fantastic, and I look forward to even improving that much in the future.
What were you averaging? You went from what to what? You shared with me. You went from a certain average of soybeans to a new average. What do you think is a new average?
Right. I think before we were averaging around 60 bushels to the acre, and in just 3 years we've had that climb up to the 70s.
Yeah, so I think that what you talked about earlier, the very first thing we talked about that seed selection, I think is really critical. But it takes the data. You can't just wake up and do it, right?
That's exactly right.
So Nick, how about from your perspective on the other side?
Yeah, the others. So I guess first start, BASF generates a lot of our own data, and I think Marc said it is, decisions in agriculture need to be data driven. So how do we leverage that and utilize the tens of thousands of trials we do on a product before we even bring it to market? A lot of that's just to make internal decisions, and then we do our best to adapt it once that product's launched. So that's where we're stepping back and even understanding how we leverage all the prior work that's been done to get a product registered into market. One example is Revex fields. So not every grower can have an experience with a product before it's registered. That obviously there's challenges there from a crop destruct standpoint and other restrictions. But once we have registration, we try to get as many demonstrations out in the hands to have a broad, geography covered with that brand, and then collect that yield data, make it anonymous, but then post it so growers and retailers and customers can evaluate the performance locally. That's just one example, but, that's where we sit in offices and we kind of rack our brains of, we understand what this product can do. How do we make sure a customer can understand where it's going to perform on their farm? And the same thing, we're partnering with our Zarvio digital farming team, how we integrate, spray timers, when's the right time to time your fungicide or your herbicide application, even looking at variable rate options down the road. Can you actually use predictive modeling to understand where in a field you may have higher disease pressure? Maybe you want a longer residual so you can max out label rates versus running an average label rate. So a lot of opportunity in the future. I think it's just all focusing on what's going to really help move, to that next 100 bushel average.
Yeah, I think this is a fun conversation. Anything else that's not that we haven't covered, or thinking about along the way that we could adopt, or you're considering adopting to get to that 100 bushel mark? Go ahead.
No, so I had the opportunity about 10 years ago. So BASF had just a soybean pilot. I don't know if you remember when that was going on, Scott. And when we stepped back and looked at what does a grower need to do to really maximize yield, at the end of the day, the summary kind of came down to how do we allow them to plant as early as possible, because that vegetative growth seemed to be critical before you got to reproductive stages. And then how do we really manage late season? It seemed to be a lot on because I think we're good at herbicide control. I think we can control weeds. We kind of all get that as long as we're diligent about it. So it's really that establishment early and then finishing strong. And that's where, every day we have scientists trying to look at opportunities on the whole growth stage, because it is a strategic crop. But, how can we bring tools and technologies to enable that? Even crazy ideas like planting soybeans in the fall that have a special coating on them. But let's just say that didn't play out quite as planned. But, we'll try it.
Place those in the shed in the fall? No. Yeah. No, well, thank you all very much, and really enjoyed the discussion. And at BASF, we hope this discussion is replicated throughout the U.S. and just replace me with the ag retailer, and then put BASF and the growers together both on seed and chemistry, and let's have a conversation, because I do believe we're on a journey to 100 bushel average. We know we have a grower in Georgia that broke into 200 bushels, I think 206, almost 207 bushels. And so it's possible. And Ryan here from Central Illinois just told us today that he's improved his yield almost over 10 bushels just in the last 3 years by incorporating new practices. So thank you guys very much for joining us for this discussion. And there'll be many more throughout the rest of the year in preparation for 2024. Thank you very much.
All right.